All right, perfect. Um, okay, yeah, a couple things before I get started. First, it would be great if you guys can call POIs and POCs verbally. We really appreciate if you do call them. It makes for a more educational round. So yeah. Um, Secondly, I do have one sheet plus top of case. So however you flow, that's how many sheets you need. Yeah, anything else? No. Okay. Let me confirm that are all the judges here? Yes, perfect. Okay. All right. That being said, my time starts now. Hello, Judge. My name is Ben, and I strongly urge an affirmative vote on the resolution that the United States federal government should ban microplastics. The plan text is that the government will ban the sale of any new product containing detectable levels of microplastics. My partner will put that in chat. This will be specifically implemented through normal ways and means. Specifically, it will take 2 years to phase in because that's the amount of time the last plan took. I'll get to that in a sec. So that's the expected normal time frame going forward. This is a policy round given the word should in the resolution, thus implying the weighing mechanism of net benefits. So that means the greatest amount of good for the greatest amount of people. And we define microplastics as small plastic particles and fibers or fragments that are less than 5 millimeters in size. Noticeably, they do not biodegrade. So some quick background and some solvency before we jump into our sole advantage. We see that in 2015, the U.S. passed the Microbead-Free Waters Act, which prohibits the manufacture and sale of rinse-off cosmetic products containing microbeads. Noticeably, this ban only affected cosmetic applications and not any other products. Specifically, this means that the U.S. would ban microplastics in clothing, cleaning products, plastic bags, and paints, and industrial applications from containing any microplastics. And we see that the solvency is that this alternative technologies that don't contain microplastics already exist, and it's easy to implement. It just hasn't taken off in a mainstream way because there really hasn't been much investment in scaling this technology because cheaper microplastic technology already exists. Let's run through a few examples of this existing technology. One of the main contributors of microplastics is clothing and paint. So in paint, we specifically see that natural paints made from materials like clay or lime are objectively better, in terms of their toxicity, and they don't contain any microplastics. And these paints already exist and are much more expensive. They're just not widely used because the microplastics dominate. We also see that microplastics ban are empirically effective. Look to the United Kingdom ban, look to the UK paper effects of the UK ban on microbeads and personal care products. Was study published in the Journal of Environmental Science found that after the ban was implemented, the levels of microplastics decreased by over 70% in some cases, and water and rivers and waterways. The research also found that the ban on microbeads had greater impact on reducing microplastic pollution than other measures such as reducing plastic bag usage and increasing recycling rates. This is also backed up by a study by Environmental Science and Technology, which found the same impacts when the U.S. has implemented the same ban. This leads us to our first and sole advantage, and that is environmental harm and human health concerns. We see that right now microplastics are really, really bad. Marine and fresh, the first uniqueness is that of marine and freshwater ecosystems. Specifically, microplastics can enter the waterways and be ingested by a variety of aquatic organisms like fish, seabirds, and marine animals. And specifically, these particles cause physical harm such as blockages in the digestive systems and contain toxic chemicals that accumulate in the organism's tissues and eventually get passed up the food chain. This ultimately leads to a reduced reproductive success, decreasing growth rates, and even death. A study from CSU Long Beach, for example, found that fish larvae who consume microplastics grow less and reproduce less, meaning it harms the fishing industry. And a study by The Guardian found that species low on the food chain ingest microplastics, which then work their way up until they are consumed by humans. And we also see there's a warrant about soil contamination, that specifically microplastics also contaminate soil and harm terrestrial organisms. And when plastics are used in mulch, they break down into smaller particles and get ingested by soil-dwelling organisms, which can affect their health and functioning of the soil ecosystem. The second uniqueness point is that of the status quo is not solvent. Over 8 million pieces of microplastics and plastics in general go into the ocean every day, specifically polluted from the U.S. We see this number is getting worse as COVID-19 adds another burden to the pollution, as the non-woven layer of facial masks release about 100 microplastics when unused and up to 1,500 when in use, during which breathing actions act as an air pump and basically pump out microplastics. We also see the paint industry is polluting more and more microplastics, despite the fact that the alternatives exist and are already being used by certain companies, which suggests you need this ban, otherwise microplastics are going to continue harmful effects. And the third uniqueness point is that of the current environmental harms. We see that a substantial amount of environmental harm comes from microplastics before they reach the ocean. For example, when they're going through rivers and streams and whatnot. And specifically, this is the result of like substantially decreasing water quality and like harming fish and like marine ecosystems in these rivers. So this means that like an immediate ban, like like a ban right now won't, like, even if it won't take all the microplastics out of the ocean, it still has like a proximal effect. And specifically the microplastics like reduce the quality of water and ultimately like affect aquatic ecosystems and the availability of safe drinking water for human populations. And that leads us to our fourth uniqueness point, and that is harm to humans. We specifically see there's two main harms. One is ingestion of microplastics. A study found that from the environmental science and technology found that roughly 70,000, that average person consumes 70,000 microplastic particles per year through food and water consumption. And like specifically the same study noted that they have the potential to lead to substantial health impacts because they clog up like arteries and stuff. And like, depending on where they go in the body, they have like substantial effects. And the more studied harmful impact of microplastics is that of like exposure to toxic chemicals. Specifically, microplastics absorb and release toxic chemicals like PAHs and BPAs, which like leach into the environment and are eventually ingested by humans. And these chemicals are known to have harmful effects on human issues. This is like a far more studied issue, and for decades, papers have proven that like specifically BPAs lead to cancer. This leads us to the links. What the plan's actually doing. We see that if the plan were to pass, all microplastics get banned. Extend our solvency about the UK ban. Specifically, we see that even a ban on just cosmetic has significantly decreased the amount of microplastics in the rivers. We want to go a step further and ban them all. The second link is that of politics. We see this leads to Biden signaling Biden needs a climate win because of the recent Willow project. Biden investing hundreds of billions into popular green technology would be the win the Democrats need.
Biden banning a specific
banning a specific like novel technology that would rally like young voters would be the like thing he needs. Specifically, the climate is Biden's main campaign strategy, but he already alienated the base with the Wheeler project, especially the base who cares a lot about the environment. This is an opportunity to rectify that. The third link is that of signaling the majority of microplastics are made up from US-based paint companies like Bayer, the paint company. This means that one, we have a signaling link to the largest manufacturers having to switch anyways, and second, we have global links. One is that Apple committed to switching to USB-C globally after the EU forced them to removing their charging port, meaning that regional solvency becomes effective globally. Onto the impacts. The first impact is that of human health. We see you're going to be extending the ingestion of microplastics causes cancer, so that directly saves lives. People with substantial exposure had a 15% higher likelihood of dying over a 15-year period. The second impact is that of environment. And we see you're going to be extending the ecosystem collapse warrant. Specifically, less fish means a butterfly effect up the food chain. This also terminalizes the fishing industry, which employs tens of thousands of people. And the third impact is that of politics. That you prevent Republicans winning broadly across 2024. This terminalizes to preventing dehumanization of trans people and protecting gender affirming surgery and LGBTQ rights, also like broader like environmental solvency going forward. This is like, thus I strongly urge an opt-out. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes, okay. I'll also take verbal POIs and POCs. Okay. If everyone is ready, sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
How many sheets do I need?
Sorry, I don't really know how that works, but I'm gonna be going over a disad, an advantage, and then like line by line. Okay, cool. There's also a CP. That's where the advantage is for, but okay, cool. So I'm going to start my time then if everyone is ready. In 3, 2, and 1. Hello, judges. My partner and I still stand on the firmest negation of the resolution resolved. The United States federal government should ban microplastics. We want to add some definitions today, or just sort of give definitions. Ban means officially or legally prohibit. Microplastics, again, we agree, are tiny plastic particles that result from two ways. One, through commercial product development, and two, the breakdown of larger plastics. This is really important because microplastics are not just those additional microplastics that are added like through microbeads, but microplastics also include the breakdown of all larger plastic items. So the affirmative today is running a complete ban on all products that contain microplastics. So that's every single plastic item. That's a very important distinction that we want to make today. So that brings me into the counterplan on the negation today, which is that the United States federal government should ban microplastics on a 2-year time frame, normal ways and means, but with a key exception, not banning plastics that are used for food packaging designed to increase shelf life, which is like shrink wrap, and importantly, avoiding the negative harms that we get from that. this will happen through normal ways and means. With that, let's go on to the advantage of the negation, the first advantage on the negation, which is addressing avoidable harms. The Guardian in 2017 finds that the added microbeads in scrubs, shower gels, and toothpaste are an avoidable part of this plastic pollution problem. A single shower could result in 100,000 plastic particles entering the ocean. So basically, we agree that there are additional microbeads that are completely avoidable and completely unnecessary. What we believe that primary microbeads are not needed and that they ought to be banned. However, this takes me to the second disadvantage, or the disadvantage to the affirmations case, and also an advantage to our own, which is the massive food shortage that's going to be created as a result of the affirmations plan. Subpoint A here is increased conflict. This is a very important distinction. So the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology finds that the majority of microplastics found in the environment are not those manufactured as primary microplastics. They are secondary microplastics, which means they're derived from the breakdown of all larger plastic items. The affirmative today is banning the source of all secondary microplastics. That includes all large plastic items. This is detrimental to food security, so let's get into that. Simple Ecology in 2022 finds that secondary microplastics are produced from large pieces of plastic, which break into tinier and tinier particles due to degradation. This can come from shedding of any plastic items, from auto tires to plastic packaging for food items, shrink wrap, all kinds of plastic items. The Guardian finds that when a vegetable like a cucumber is shrink wrapped, its life is extended by a whopping 15 days. For example, a cucumber wrapped in plastic can stay fresh for about 20 days, while an unwrapped cucumber stays fresh for about 5 days. That's a 4 times difference. Now, this takes us to the next layer of analysis. We have enough food for the roughly 7 billion people alive today, but nearly 1 billion are hungry or malnourished, mostly due to poverty and unequal distribution. To feed those who are currently hungry and the additional 2 billion plus people who will live on the planet by 2050, our best projections are that crop production will need to increase by 60 and 100%. This means that there will be more demand for food, especially with a shelf life. And what we see is that the affirmative will be decreasing that shelf life by 4 times. There's going to be 4 times increase in the amount of these products that are demanded. This exacerbates the potential for this also increases the demand, or increases the demand for speed for different products like water as well. This exacerbates the potential for water wars. Agricultural production in relation to need is a security factor, and future forecasts indicate challenges. The world's population is expected to increase to 9.6 billion by 2050. Many people will also change their diet. According to the UN, society needs to increase food production radically until 2050. This is at a time when increasing food production will become difficult. War is preceded by tensions, of which there are many potential sources. Tensions can arise from shortages of water, energy, and not least food. To reduce the number of victims of conflict, society must ensure food production and the supply of water and food and energy. Innovation in agricultural methods is one approach that could be taken. The approach that should not be taken is the complete ban of this kind of plastic packaging, because it's absolutely essential to shelf life, absolutely essential to the actual dispensation of food. Now let's go to the second subpoint, which is increasing methane emission. Plastic packaging protects food during transport, and it can extend the shelf life of perishable food items, again, which means less food goes into landfills and less methane is produced. Landfill waste is responsible for about 11% of global methane emissions. This is expected to increase by about 70% by 2050 as the global population continues to climb, according to the World Bank. What we find here is that there is a significant problem. We find that the affirmative today is creating a massive detriment to food security in the United States. What we see is that if you have a 4 times decrease in food supply with a shelf life in the next 2 years, you're going to have a massive conflict in that transition time, which you cannot solve for. This is going to lead to massive food insecurity. It's going to lead to death, and it's going to lead to just overall detriments to the people of the United States. But with that, let's go into the case that we hear from the affirmation line by line. We agree with their framework of net benefits. We believe that this is a policy resolution, and we believe that on the side of negation, we're the only side that actually does the most amount of good for the most amount of people, because we actually solve for the harms of food insecurity that the affirmation creates today. But with that, let's get into their contentions. The first point that they make is that microbeads and microplastics hurt the environment. Again, we agree. We actually assume all of the impacts that they bring up here. We agree that There are harmful effects on the environment from additional microbeads that are completely unnecessary and completely have no actual impact on the production, or there is no necessity for these microplastics. Again, these are primary microplastics. We agree with this, and we assume these impacts on negation. But additionally, they bring up the point of President Joe Biden, and they say that President Joe Biden needs a climate win in order to win, and they try to link this out to preventing a Republican win. Again, this is the negation plan is a massive win for the climate. In fact, we give you multiple reasons why, because we actually prevent the massive harm of methane pollution that the affirmation creates today. The affirmation actually has a two-sided massive detriment to the environment we hear, or to the community in the United States. First, we hear the massive detriment to families when it comes to food security, because again, it's absolutely essential. Plastic packaging is essential for shelf life, but we also hear the second disadvantage here to the environment, which is that they're going to be increasing the amount of methane emissions because of perishable food items, which actually release significant amounts of methane in the status quo. They're going to increase that by eliminating plastic packaging. So on this point, we actually turn this point because we see that they're actually going to create a massive detriment to the climate. They're actually not going to be able to access this impact. But additionally, even if they do, the negation does as well, because the negation is also banning the massive detriment that additional microbeads present. We believe that the negation's ban on primary microbeads and primary microplastics assumes all of the impacts, positive impacts when it comes to a political like climate win on this point. So at the end of the day, I think we believe that the affirmation is creating a significant detriment when it comes to food security. We believe that they're going to be significantly detrimenting the environment. We also believe that the negation is the only side that reconciles with these negative harms, and we actually do the most amount of good for the most amount of people. Thank you.
All right. Order is one new sheet, then the neg case and the app case in order. Specifically, we're going to be starting with the counter plan, and then onto like the advantage DA,
Read
and
the
then
new sheet first.
move over. But yeah, obviously a new sheet is going on top. So is everybody ready? Cool. Give me like 10 seconds to get my flows in order, and then I'll start. Also, yeah, POIs verbally, everything like that. I guess you can ask a POC if you're confused, which is good for us to stop time and we can have a conversation. So yeah. Time starts in 3, 2, 1. A is the interpretation. The neg does not get access to a plan inclusive counterplan. Again, the neg does not get access to a plan inclusive counterplan. A PIC is defined as a CP that includes the entire plan text plus something that adds or subtracts an element of the plan. The violation if they ran a plan inclusive counterplan because they literally do the entire affirmative case except a small little section of like shrink wrap standards. 1, predictability. There's an infinite number of possible PICs, so the neg has 20 minutes to prep of what the debate is actually going to be about. Our prep time becomes useless, so we can't predict every possible PIC. Literally, how are we supposed to predict food insecurity and shrink wrap being bad? We say that predictability is good for education because a study by Stanford found that students who were given a syllabus at the beginning of the syllabus at the beginning of the year did significantly better than students who were not. So you need to predict something in order to get education. 2 is ground. Destroys all 7 minutes of offense for a case because the neg literally still garners all of it and causes all for first speech to be essentially useless. They steal our case because the neg prevents clash and denies us the ability to have unique offense within a round. To the point where they literally say we subsume all their impacts over and over and over again on the app sheet. It's probably pretty obvious that they destroy ground. Also clash. They destroy clash because they don't clash with a single part of our case. We say that clash is the only way to get an education debate because otherwise we can just like talk into a wall or do speech stick, which that the only way that we get a unique education. The reason schools fund debate in the first place is because we get clash. We can actually debate, and which is why you have to be evaluating the fact that the only way to get education is to clash. 3, reciprocity. If the net can make minor adjustments to the app, then we can't too, which justifies intrinsic and severance perms, which means that debate just evolves back into like really dumb theory arguments or really dumb like intrinsic perms or severance perms, which we say is not good for education or fairness. D is the voters. 1, fairness. Arguments used at the debate round and creates a world where the net can always win by picking out a small parts of the resolution. Again, they literally subsume all of our impacts, meaning that we have no unique offense under their world. But we say we probably do, but we'll get into that later. This causes the debate to be a coin toss, which means that there's no reason for us to actually do the activity and it would collapse. 2, education. The whole reason we do debate is education. The only unique educational value in debate is clash. Otherwise, we would just Google a topic and learn just as much. We see that again, pigs specifically kill clash, so they should be voted down on education. Also, the only reason schools fund debate in the first place is because of education. So by destroying the educational value of the debate, you destroy like debate in the first place. C is the underview. 1, a priori evaluates a prior question of the debate. We have to establish the rules of the game before we can play it. 2, no RVIs because it created a chilling effect and deter legitimate theory. 5, competing interpretations is the only coherent way of evaluating theory. And 6 is drop the debater to prevent future abuse via norm setting. 6, we said that even if you don't have proven abuse, you're still going to be voting because theories like through competing interpretations, it's a like a rule for debate. We see this is a good rule for debate. But again, we also have proven abuse, so you should vote on that too.
Read my perm.
Okay. On to our opponent's case. Number one, the CP. Per the CP, they don't give you any articulation as to why they are mutually exclusive. Specifically, they try to argue that we ban plastics that might lead to them being mutually exclusive, but that's literally not what their counterplan text says or our counterplan text says. It only says detectable levels of microplastics. Normal wisdom means that we model off the past, which means that shrink wrap is probably not even going to be a part of this. Again, Judge, we say that even though shrink wrap could eventually like decay into microplastics, right now it is non-detectable because it's still a macroplastic and there's no detectable levels of microplastic in a shrink wrap, which means that again, like our opponents are not doing anything different from us. Our opponents do not give you any reason as to why our plan isn't valid. So you have to be buying the fact that we are only banning plastic products containing a detectable levels of microplastics. So that's
like not,
i.e. like, yeah, i.e. not shrink wrap. But on to our opponent's case. There's going to be two solvency deficits. The first solvency deficit is going to be that the reason we have food insecurity in the status quo is not because of shrink wrap, but because we throw away like 90% of our food. Our opponents do not solve this, and they don't solve the fact that we throw away all food that doesn't look exactly perfect. Like we can probably just eat like a cucumber that looks a little misshapen instead of having plastics. Number two, we see that we have alternate solvency because in the Philippines, they've already banned all single-use microplastics, which include shrink wrap, yet they don't have massive food insecurity issues. That's probably better because they also get impacts of less pollution overall because they have less plastic being emitted in the first place. So you can probably turn this and you can extend our own impacts onto why pollution is specifically environmental and oceanic pollution is bad. We get access to more of that. Onto the specifics of what they say. Okay, we talk about these secondary microplastics and how they're detrimental to food insecurity. Again, extend the argumentation that if we wanted to solve for food insecurity, literally all we would have to do is stop throwing away like 66% of our food. There's no reason as to why we have to continue to use microplastics or continue to use plastics in the first place. So again, this is a nonsensical argument. Again, if Thailand or if the Philippines can literally do it, they banned all single-use plastics. There's no reason why it can't be done in the United States. We do not see massive starvation in the Philippines because cucumbers don't last for an extra 15 days. All right. On to the second argumentation about exacerbating water wars. There was literally no link to any of this. They talk about how the population is going to go up to 9.6 billion. Yeah, the problem means that we will develop more innovative ways of storing food in any way. Number two, we see that alternative environmentally friendly alternatives definitely exist right now, but even if they don't, the natural competition for this plan being implemented will lead to this technology being developed. Again, like if they ban the specific type of shrink wrap, they'll make a new shrink wrap that has no microplastics or has no like bad environmental harms to get around this plan. So we'll have the exact same benefit because there's still a capitalist profit incentive, but you won't have any of the environmental harm. So if anything, we lead to a significantly better world by like not doing the counter plan, by doing our plan. Okay. They also talk about like less food to landfills, but like a lot of things that go into landfills are like plastic as well. So they just have more single-use plastics. Because if you like shrink wrap a cucumber, when you get home, you're gonna throw away the shrink wrapping. So you have significantly more single-use plastic that you're throwing away. Also, again, like less food to plastics, this is not unique because we throw away all our food anyway. So there's no reason as to why they're going to be solving for this problem. They see this as a significant issue as the highest magnitude. It has literally no probability, so there's no reason why you're going to be voting on it. But again, we said the highest magnitude is probably going to be our conceded impacts on like saving lives, specifically the fact that like these single-use plastics cause cancer. Let's get on to our case. The overview for our case, again, like extend all of their responses as a reason why the theory shell is valid. They don't make a single response to our entire case. They make one turnout link, which I'll get to later, but they say over and over again, we quote, subsume their entire impacts. That is terrible for debate. Again, they don't clash with anything. We have no idea this is actually a good idea or not because we don't know what our opponents are literally arguing for the exact same affirmative. That is really, really bad for debate. And again, it links to the educational impacts that I give you on the theory sheet. But let's go into the specifics of what they say and a few key extensions.
We have a marginal reduction in microplastics.
We say that if anything, we have a marginal reduction of microplastics. If our opponents are correct, that we are banning more microplastics on our plan, then again, we just have better solvency for microplastics. Our opponents don't say why the specific thing is a small problem. We say that shrink wrapping is probably a significant amount of microplastics that are being that are going directly into the ocean. So to the point where all our opponents are doing is making the problem worse or not as good. There's no reason that's why you're going to be going to the counter plan. But also extend the perm, like just don't buy the counterplan on basis, which means that you shouldn't be evaluating all the responses where they say the counterplan subsumes the impacts. If they can't make any offensive turns to any of their case, just vote AF on inherently. If anything, just vote AF on presumption because we have essentially the same impacts, but we actually like get access to them. Okay. We say that the burden of the affirmative is only to prove the resolution is true. We definitely have proven the resolution is true because in general, like we should be banning microplastics. Our opponents agree. They literally say microplastics are terrible in their own speech. On to the links. All right. Their only thing is that again, they like subsume that politics advantage, extend the impacts on this too. Extend the signaling advantage. We say that the signaling advantage or the signaling link is not going to be subsumed by our opponents because they don't have access to specifically signaling for large chemical producers. We need to have all the US producers be signaling that they are going to be forced to change to a different policy. Without that, we don't get access to the broad spectrum global solvency, which means that even in the best case world for our opponents, they still don't have access to the signaling link. Yeah, on all microplastics being banned, again, even a small amount of microplastics can still lead to more pollution, can still kill more fish, and can still lead to the destruction of both the fishing industry and lead to more people dying from cancer. So again, any amount of microplastics in the ocean is bad. We just have less than our opponents. So yeah, so again, you're going to be extending the link specifically that we get access to a better signaling link. Even if the politics link is a wash, one, you shouldn't be buying the response to the politics link being a wash. But even if you buy this, we get access to better signaling because again, you need all the companies to be banning of microplastics, all the big US manufacturers, or else you don't get access to the solvency. So thus we still have the impacts on human health, extend that we're saving lives from cancer, extend the environmental impacts that we're saving the fishing industry, which terminalizes to thousands of jobs, extend the politics impact that we are saving the we're stopping dehumanization of trans people and LGBTQ people because Republicans won't win in 2024. So yeah, all those impacts, easy F vote. Don't vote on the CP because you should be voting on theory first. Vote F.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to be doing is addressing the theory shell, and then I'm going to be addressing the perm, rebuilding our case, and then refuting theirs. Okay. So if everyone's ready, I'll start my time in 3, 2, 1. Okay, first addressing the theory shell, they say that it's a plan inclusive counterplan, which is inherently avoiding clash in today's debate. There's a couple responses to this. Number one, it is directly not a plan inclusive counterplan. We're directly doing something that the affirmation is specifically not doing within their plan. We are specifically including a vastly significant portion of plastics that are produced today, which are used in shrink wrap. It's not one tiny minute like microscopic change. This is a very significant portion of plastic that is produced that we really effectively should not ban in the next 2 years. They say that prep time becomes useless because they can't prepare for anything that the negation says. There's a couple responses to this. There are number one, the affirmation could have basically put in any plan that has like specific variations to affirm the resolution that the United States federal government should ban microplastics. For the affirmation could have included almost any different variation of how they are banning microplastics. Are they banning primary microplastics? Are they banning secondary microplastics? What's the time frame for microplastics? The negation still has like the same ability to not be able to predict what the affirmation is going to run in their plan to affirm the resolution. For that reason, you don't buy the argument that the negation is like specifically going to be more abusive at basically like stealing their prep time and stealing their clash, because the affirmation variable could have done a time frame change that we couldn't have been able to predict. They could have done only primary microplastic ban, which we wouldn't have been able to predict. They could have banned specific microplastics, etc., and it still would have been affirming the resolution that the US actually should ban microplastics. There's nothing in the resolution that says the US actually should ban all microplastics, yet they decided to ban all microplastics. So they specifically chose a plan that would have that was like less broad when they could in reality been more specific, and thus they don't have like, it's not an inherent problem in today's debate that the negation is running a more specific counterplan when the affirmation had the same ability to run a more specific counterplan. Yeah, I'll take your POI.
Yeah, what would we have run in the situation that you want us to run that would have like skewed you out of the round?
Sorry?
What would we have run in this plan, in this round? Like what plan would we have run that would have skewed you out of the round that you think?
I don't know, it skewed you out of the round, but I don't know what that means. But I think that you guys could have run something about a time frame change. I think you also could run specifically only banning primary microplastics, which is like items that actually have like microplastics in them, like for cosmetic use, rather than banning all all things with microplastics, like clothing, which was one of the things that you read in your background. So like you could have like effectively run like very specific variations of banning microplastics, yet you did not. They say that it steals clash, yet like on the negation, we are literally directly telling you a specific instance in which plastics should not be banned. This is directly going against like, for example, the Biden signaling point. They say that, oh, we need to ban all microplastics in order to have good positive signaling. We have clash on this argument where we tell you that you don't need to ban all microplastics to have positive signaling, and that the counterplan does this just as well. And then we also clash on like whether or not we're going to like they also say like, oh, well, we like benefit by like not having as much in landfill. We benefit by just like banning more microplastics, which is a positive thing. All of these things are like points on which we have clash, yet they just claim that we don't have clash, even though we are directly telling you a specific example in which we should ban microplastics, which is likely what the resolution was intending. The affirmation is arguing to ban all microplastics. The negation is coming up here and telling you, no, we should not ban all microplastics. We should be giving you specific examples where plastics should not be banned that can cause microplastics, because that's going to be detrimental for long-term stability within different countries. Within the United States. So ultimately, we are giving you a direct clash on negation, to the point where like the negation is literally just not banning all microplastics. Okay, and then they talk about how you can perm the CP because it's not mutually exclusive, because like it's not like detectable. It's like specifically detectable levels of microplastics. Okay, so you talk about how clothes have microplastics in your background, and like that's something you're going to be addressing within your case. There's a couple. So because like clothing, the microplastics that come from clothing is a form of secondary microplastics. That means that that's an item that specifically doesn't have like tiny beads, for example, like in cosmetic items, but it's something that once it starts to break down, that causes microplastic degradation. So if you yourself were talking about banning the use of clothing, which was something you talked about in your background, you're specifically not banning, or you're specifically banning secondary microplastics. Secondary microplastics can come from food packaging, therefore it is not permeable, because they are directly banning secondary things that can come from secondary microplastics, detectable levels of microplastics, which includes food packaging. So you cannot on one hand ban secondary microplastics, and then on the other hand continue to say that you are going to ban, you don't have to ban food shrink wrap, because that doesn't have a lot of detectable levels of microplastics. That's just simply not true. No, thank you, I have a lot to get through. They also, okay, and then like again, it's not specific to primary microplastics, so therefore you don't buy the argument that like it's not included in detectable levels of like microplastics. You don't buy this argument, and you don't buy the perm you don't buy the perm. Okay, so now going on to rebuild our disadvantages. Our first point was about food shortages. They basically, like, their main two refutations to this was like, oh, well, people can just eat misshapen cucumbers. This is a vast mischaracterization of what our disadvantage is actually telling you. Our disadvantage, which they have failed to properly address, is basically telling you that if we effectively ban all food wrapping right now with the technology that we have, we're going to have a 4% increase in a 4% decrease in shelf life. There's going to be a massive increase in the amount of food that goes to landfills. That is going to lead to an exorbitant amount of methane increase that goes is from like the collection of food waste within landfills. We also tell you that it's going to incredibly exacerbate food insecurity. We tell you that like that food insecurity as like a primary thing that can contribute to conflict, increase conflicts, and increase the probability of war. They don't actually properly address this argument. They're just telling you, oh, they can't eat misshapen cucumbers. That is not at all what we're arguing here. If food goes bad, it goes to the landfill. If it's moldy, you can't eat it. We're directly telling you that it's causing food insecurity, and they have not addressed that argument. They also talk about how there's going to be less pollution overall that goes to the ocean. You prioritize decreasing the probability of war over some pollution that could go to the ocean from plastic packaging. Ultimately, we tell you like if we ban like most microplastics which come from the CP, but we don't specifically ban food packaging, we're effectively preventing that a significant portion of that pollution. So you prioritize, you weigh like lowering some levels of pollution to the ocean and preventing war, and also preventing the 70% increase in methane that could happen in the next by 2050 because of an increase in food shortages, etc., etc. You weigh that over like the small amount of pollution that might go to the ocean because of food packaging. Okay, so they also talk about how you're going to be able to develop new technology. Okay, so their time frame is 2 years. They have to prove to us why in the next 2 2 years. Even within that time frame, let's say we ban all my packaging that's used in food packaging. That means that the United States is going to have to completely detransition from the entirety of how we package food, how we transport food. That transition over the next 2 years is feasibly not going to happen. That new technology does not exist. They have to prove to us why in the next 2 years we're going to be able to develop that new technology. And then even if there is some time after that 2 years in which we have not developed that new technology, that means that we're going to have massive food insecurity, massive food shortages, and they have to prove to us why that's not going to result in a massive conflict. If the United States, if there's a 4% increase and a percent decrease in the amount of food we have, that is undeniably going to lead to a massive conflict, massive instability. For those reasons, I firmly negate. Thank you.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Yes, okay, so this is the third neg speech. It's a speech of 4 minutes. All right, if everyone is ready, I'm going to start my time in 3, 2, and 1. Hello, judges. My partner and I stand on the firmest opposition of the resolution resolved. The United States federal government should ban microplastics. I'm going to be going over the theory shell, the permutation, and then I'll go into some weighing. So first, let's start off with the theory shell. There absolutely is clash that the negation has provided in today's debate. The negation's case is absolutely fomenting the education in this debate round. What we have to understand is that the negation is allowed to denote an exception to the affirmation. In fact, that is what this resolution was likely intending. What we find is that the resolution today said that the United States federal government should ban microplastics. How did the affirmation interpret that? They interpreted it as every single detectable amount of microplastics in any product. So the affirmative chose to be all-inclusive. That was a choice that the affirmation made. They did not have to do that, but they did. The negation had to prepare for every single possibility that the affirmative could have had, which could have been selective amounts of microplastics. It could have been all-inclusive. They could have had a very short time frame, a very long time frame. There's no way that neg could have known that. AF chose to be all-inclusive. The negation is only responding to that by negating the resolution. The only burden that the negation has today is negating the resolution, which is what we are doing by providing an exception. That is what negation does today. But with that, understand that education is absolutely important. The negation provides multiple areas of clash to the affirmation, which are all educative. They all contribute to the educational value of this round. And we have not at all hurt this round in terms of fairness. This is just not a substantive argument. With that, let's get into the permutation. What we have to understand in today's round is that the affirmation has provided an all-inclusive ban. Primary and secondary plastics. The negation objects to the ban of all secondary plastics. This is absolutely ridiculous. We believe the negation's world would not do that, inherently would not do that. So the affirmation is already doing those things. They cannot both do the things and not do the things all at the same time. That's just not feasible. So what we have to understand is that the permutation is not valid at the point where the negation literally rejects a part of the affirmation's plan. There's no reason that there is a permutation here. The negation cannot both ban secondary plastics, including shrink wrap, and not ban shrink wrap. They can't do both. They simply cannot. There is no permutation. But with that, let's do some final weighing. Understand, judges, that the biggest impact in today's round that we can actually feasibly access is food insecurity, shortages, and the leading instability globally. What we have to understand is that the way to prevent conflict over the massive food shortages that are going to be created is by negating today, because the way the negation avoids the impacts of food shortages that are created by the banning of secondary microplastics. Understand that when the affirmation says they're going to ban all secondary microplastics, which again was conceded, which is what they said in their first speech, when they do that, they're banning the packaging that food comes in. This is absolutely essential to people that need food that is pre-packaged. This is like a massive portion of low-income people rely on this. But additionally, it significantly detriments fresh foods. Again, we give you the example of the cucumber. They misinterpret this and they say that like cucumbers can be shaped wrongly. Like, I don't know what that has to do with anything. What the problem here is, they're leading to food insecurity, food shortages, because they're literally getting rid of the mechanism that keeps food fresh. But also we have the massive impact of methane pollution. This is something that goes unaddressed. The idea that when they do this, when they remove the ability for plastic packaging, they actually increase the amount of pollution that happens because because of the amount of perishable food that's going to be thrown into these landfills. So this is another significant impact that we have on our side of the debate. The only impacts that we hear on their side of the debate are things about hurting the environment. Again, the negation assumes these impacts by negating. We also get the impacts of removing the microbeads. But what's really important is the one example they brought up in this round about the UK did not ban shrink wrap. They literally read evidence that they only banned microbeads in cosmetic products. So their ban that they're talking about, that they're citing, is what we are doing. That's what the negation is actually doing. The affirmative is not living up to that ideal goal that they give. For these reasons, please negate. Thank you.
All right, everyone good to get started? Perfect. Okay. My time starts now. Judge, there are 4 main things to consider in this round. First, theory. To the point in which they don't respond to the counterinterpretation, they don't give you a counterinterpretation. Don't say that you need to be evaluating the theory shown reasonability and concede a standard. This should be a very easy affirmation vote. The overview is vote on theory because of the conceded reciprocity standard. If you don't buy this, just vote off in case because the perm and turn on creating new technologies. But let's specifically talk about the layers of the theory. First, on the predictability standard, even if we can be unpredictable, doesn't mean the neg gets to be. We say that neg can be more unpredictable because we have finite number of plans. This gets conceded. This is a unique reason you're preferring this standard. Second, on clash, they don't respond to the meat of the clash argument to the point in which until the entirety of the block, they're just saying we subsume the entirety of the app impacts. This should be a pretty easy trigger pull on the standard. The argument here is that they have to respond to the affirmative advantages specifically because that's the only way we can get education. Even if they specify a specific point of where we shouldn't ban microplastics, they don't clash with that thesis of the affirmative as we specify it, to the point where the resolution is that USFC, they don't uphold their burden. And 3, on the conceded standard, they concede reciprocity. So they concede that in our interpret of the world, we develop into infinite and severed perms and kill debate. This is potential abuse, but they concede you vote on this as well. And finally, they give you a half-ass, or they give you like a sort of fleshed out we meet articulation, but they also consider definition of a pick and or violation, which probably means you shouldn't be evaluating their like we meet interpretation specifically. Specifically like part of a pick is you can subtract it. That's literally what we said in our interpretation. It's pasted in chat if you want to double check that. And finally, on the underview thing, 1, they don't read an RBI. This means that this is you can only vote AF on the theory shell. Specifically, we only need to win one standard or even a 0.001% chance that the standard is true to win that our interpret is better. We say that we can easily vote on the reciprocity standard, which implicates to the deconstruction of debate by just like having everyone sevens perms and then responding with the picks. Also, they have no counter interpret, which means that you're probably preferring the affirmative theory shell like on net. Okay. Extend the underview that's specifically like it's an a priori shell. This means you're uplaying it over everything else, and the implication is you drop the debaters. The second important thing is the question of the perm. If you do not buy the theory, let's start with the perm. Specifically, their only response is that somehow shards are like secondary microplastics. They objectively aren't, to the point in which I give you an articulation in my PMC about how there's like direct microplastic byproducts as a result of shards. You're probably buying that they are not secondary microplastics, and therefore our plan text is not banning the thing, the negations, the thing they specify in the pick, and therefore they don't have a case. Because again, the burden of the negation team is to disprove the affirmative. If they're not giving you a unique reason as to why the affirmative is bad, you have to be voting for the negation. And specifically, you're also going to be extending the normal ways and means articulation that in the past, the way microplastics have been banned, they don't ban secondary microplastics. And to the point in which that gets cold conceded, you're probably buying this as the specific implementation of the plan text. If they really wanted to know, they should have just asked a plan text if we were banning secondary. They obviously didn't. Second, on the question of the DA, there's 2 reasons we're winning their disadvantage. First, they concede the turn. They concede that we force competition to create a more environmentally friendly way of packaging food with the exact same shelf life because of the profit incentive. Specifically, their only response is time frame in the block. Golden turn this. 2 years is absolutely sufficient because they concede it was enough for the cosmetics industry under the previous ban. They also concede that this technologies already exist. This is really, really, really damning because it means that their entire case is disproven, because to the point in which the biodegradable non-microplastic technology exists, it means they have no unique disadvantage to the affirmation plan, in which case you're defaulting back to the burden of the negation, which is to disprove the aff. They are not doing that. This should be an easy aff ballot. So they also concede the terminal defense that specifically the Philippines bans single-use plastics like the cucumber wraps I talk about. They are absolutely no issues there. This just means that they have no impact. Vote after on presumption because none of these issues happened in the Philippines. No water wars, no starvation, no mass dehumanization. The companies were easily able to adapt. This also non-links the methane impact because this is based on having the food perishing in the first place, which didn't happen in the Philippines. And finally, on the question of burdens, specifically, as my partner articulated and gets conceded, the burden of the negation team is to prove that the affirmation plan is false, to prove the affirmation plan is a bad idea. They don't give you any unique disadvantages other than like a small marginal risk, that you might lead to food security. Extend the terminal defense. This probably means you can't be buying that, but specifically, I'll extend the don't uphold their burden even if you buy the entirety of the yes.
Sorry, this is kind of late. I was looking back on my flow. The argument that there's that technology already exists, like biodegradable technology already exists, is a new argument. Like you said that like they could develop that new technology in your second speech, but it wasn't like that technology already exists.
I can read you the articulation I wrote for my partner that, and I'll quote, alternative environmental friendly alternatives definitely already exist. You can also extend the solvency block I read out of my PMC that specifically says alternative environmental technologies exist.
It's also a golden term.
All right.
Golden term. This is a new response.
It's not a golden term because that was brought up in your second speech and then I was like responding to it, and so you're making like new art, but it's okay. It's judge's discretion.
It's a panel, obviously. So yeah. Okay. My time resumes now. So obviously the question of burden, we specifically see the negation doesn't uphold their burden. So this means specifically on the question of impacts, you're going to be voting for the affirmative team on twofold impacts. One, that get conceded that microplastics are really bad for human life to the point in which they cut 50% of survival if you're substantially exposed to BPA. Secondly, we probably tell you that we have the highest magnitude impacts in this round. This is objectively leading to millions of people dying. This probably means this should be a pretty apt ballot.
At the very least, we have less microplastics.
At the very least, we have less microplastics, and that's a unique reason to vote for the affirmation over the negation because microplastics are worse than non-existent defense. So if you don't buy the theory shell, if you don't buy the answers to the perm, and you don't buy the terminal defense, then vote on burdens. Thus, I strongly urge an app ballot. Thank you.
And vote on impacts.
Yeah, the impacts.
Okay, is everybody here?
Wave is here.
Yeah, so I think I was the last judge to submit, so the ultimate decision was a 3-0 for the Gov. If any of the other judges want to give their feedback first, they can feel free.
Sure, I can go. Yeah, so I voted entirely on the theory shell, like the PICS-PAD shell. I think that there's just a lot of crucial arguments that are conceded by the negation that make it pretty easy to pull the trigger there. Like, I think that since the voter level is pretty much entirely conceded, it makes it kind of easy for the app to come in, and if they win just like even a little bit of offense on this shell, I can vote there. Like, namely, I think it really needed to be responded to that this was a priori, because since like it's agreed pretty much, the app makes that extension that it is the first thing I should be evaluating. It's the first place that I have to look in the round. And then when I'm evaluating that, I look to the rest of the voter level, which is also extended. So I default to competing interpretations, which the affirmation actually does extend. And since there is no interpretation, it makes it kind of hard already off the bat for the negation to have offense in the round. But then on the shell, but then I look to this we meet, and I think if the affirmation is correct in saying that the we meet argument is largely insufficient because it pretty much describes the definition of a pick that is provided by the affirmation that was put in chat. And then I think that makes it then hard for that to mitigate most of the shell. And then I think that the affirmation is slightly ahead on, accessing clash, because I think like a lot of the arguments made by the negation kind of miss the specific analysis made by the affirmation as to like how they have lost clash and therefore education. I think that it isn't super effective to say that like there is clash on this one specific issue when the PICS-PAD shell pretty much addresses why it's bad to just pick out of one specific thing and why that then harms the clash. And I think like the proven abuse arguments are pretty persuasive. And yeah, I just think that at that point, because the voters are conceded. And as for the reciprocity standard, I think that there is analysis from the negation that kind of sounds like it on some level addresses reciprocity, because because the affirmation like could have any like variation of a plan, like they're not like necessarily obligated to ban all microplastics. But I think that again, the affirmation is correct in saying that like this doesn't exactly address their specific argument as to how they could have a bunch of severance firms, et cetera. And so I think that they're just like ahead enough that I have to vote there. I do, however, think though that since the voters were like completely dropped and it was pretty obvious that this was going to be like where I would have to vote, I think that the affirmation could have like collapsed more to the theory, just might have potentially made it a little bit cleaner if like we would have sat on the standards level for a lot longer, just like easier to pull the trigger, because I think the rest of the debate, and at least on my flow, didn't end up mattering much once I voted there. Yeah. Any questions?
No, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll go. So I wasn't voting on the theory so much because I thought that the affirmative or the negation, I was more convinced by their arguments about how they wean me in terms of clash. And I think they were pretty specific in the areas that were defined by clash. And so I wasn't voting on theory, and I wasn't voting on the perm because I think the negation was very clear about how you can't both ban all microplastics and then have this exception. So I don't think you could actually permit. Where I thought the affirmative had more convincing analysis was on this idea that at the margins, you're banning more microplastics. And so that was able to extend their health benefits argument. And then the environmental harms and like the ecosystems, how they scale up harms. I think at the end of the day, like where I ended up voting more for the gov was that this example from the Philippines never was really addressed by the negation. And the idea there was like they banned all of these plastics and then it didn't end up with water wars or this like massive food insecurity. And so insofar as the negation was not able to access like real world disadvantages, like the probability in terms of like the empirical cases that we have to look at with these bans, I was able to grant that there's marginal increases to the advantages of the AFS version of the plan that the negation counter plan isn't able to co-opt. So that's sort of where I voted. I think that the affirmative had more advantages and didn't link into the kinds of disadvantage scenarios the negation was talking about. And so that's where I voted.
Yeah, so I'll keep my RFT short because the other two judges already covered a lot of what I wanted to say. Just on the theory, I do definitely buy the affirmation's main arguments on the voters, and I think that the lack of negation work done on a lot of the voters means that I think that the government, the gov side definitely pulls ahead in terms of the theory argument. But where I vote mainly is largely on, similar to Aaron, the conceded arguments in regards to the case examples that the affirmation mentions. So the Philippines being a good one, the cosmetics example of 2 years being a plenty enough time frame for innovation, and the point that was then brought up later in the POO about alternate technology already existing and it being able to be developed. I buy that all flows for the affirmation for me. And even if I don't buy those arguments, just on the plan text, the way I had interpreted the plan text, at least from the onset, was detectable microplastics at the time of manufacture, not necessarily what single-use plastics degrade down to. Because I think it was pretty clear that the plan text was defining a moment as in the ban and then defining everything from that moment on, and defining all those products that would be banned based on the criteria that they meet when they're being manufactured, not when they degrade years and years down the line. But even if that interpretation got a little bit messy, once again, the conceded arguments still flow for the AF, and that's ultimately where I vote. Thank you.
I had a quick question for, I mean, I guess any of the judges. So it sounds like some of you were split about either voting on theory versus voting on case turns and whatnot. So given that, did my collapse make sense, or would you guys have preferred if I just collapsed to case or just collapsed to theory? I don't know if the two judges who voted on case would have been more receptive to theory if I like spent the entire 5 minutes on it.
I don't think so. Like, I thought they were pretty, like, I bought their extensions of Clash into their voters. So, like, you could have spent more time on theory, but, like, I think the arguments that I was more convinced by that you did make were the case arguments. Like, for me personally, I bought their, like, extension of, like, Clash into their voters of, like, how that created education. So, like, I was there for them on the responses to your theory. So I don't think if you spent more time, it would have convinced me.
I would say it was kind of similar. It wasn't that you didn't spend enough time on theory or that you mismanaged the theory arguments in general. It's just, I think me personally, I was more convinced by the case arguments. For you, I don't think there was anything more that you really could have done in regards to theory, but I'm glad that you didn't collapse entirely on theory and did manage to mention some of those points about the conceded arguments, because once again, that is where I voted. So I think you collapsed fine. It's just a matter of personal interpretation from the judge's perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm kind of the only one then, but I just love like a nice, clean, like really heavy theory collapse. I guess if the other judges were more convinced by other things, then like at the end of the day, that just really comes down to like, I guess like how they read the flow. In my mind, I think like had you sat on just like a lot of like the line by line a lot longer, it would have made it like a lot easier for me to vote there. But I mean, I definitely buy like all the extensions. It's a priori, competing interpretations, drop the debater. So for me, it was pretty clear.
Okay, thank you guys. That's really helpful. I appreciate it.
Congrats, y'all, on TOC.